Here in Austin, a convicted killer from Houston is settling in tonight. He's a new guest at a Del Valle halfway house despite only serving 1/3 of his 75-year prison sentence. 47-year-old David Port was convicted of the 1984 murder of a young postal carrier, Deborah Schatz. He was freed thanks to a technicality of a now defunct Texas law passed years ago when prisons were overcrowded. KXAN's David Scott says Port's release is leaving many folks worried for their own safety.
That early release law is now history, but David Port is out of prison, mandatorily, even though he was passed over for parole every year since 2007. His new home, Del Valle. Eventually, David Port will leave this halfway house, find a job, maybe an apartment, but even then, the Board of Pardons tells me he will always be on a short leash. That tight leash means no movement outside his home without advance permission. Constant GPS monitoring, twice a month parole officer visits, no weapons, and regular drug tests. Still, folks who live and work nearby worry.
It's not a high security prison probably, so if it's like that, it does make me a little concerned about the safety.
Before she died earlier this year, Deborah Schatz's mother dreaded this day.
He took something precious away from me. He did. I would like to blow him off this earth. That's what I would like to do.
There's not a day that doesn't go by that my wife or Deborah's sister doesn't shed a tear for her.
This same halfway house, the Austin Transitional Center, had a convicted sex offender simply walk away last year. He's still on the loose. David Scott, KXAN News.
That sex offender escapee is 40-year-old Kevin Patrick Stosser. After being confronted with violations at the Transitional Center, he fled and hasn't been heard from since. He's on the U.S. Marshals' top 15 most wanted list, but officers say tips on his whereabouts have dried up. The loophole in the Texas law allowing Port to go free is also opening the door for hundreds of other criminals. Records show over 1,000 people convicted of a crime and imprisoned in Texas between 1977 and 1987 are eligible for mandatory release. It's estimated hundreds of those inmates were convicted of murder. We've also learned the state cannot do anything to prevent the early releases of these prisoners. That's because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that even though Texas abolished the law in 1995, it cannot be changed.